Welcome everyone to the third day of the DWC2021 virtual conference. My name is Krista Carr, and I'm the Executive Vice President of Inclusion Canada. I'm coming to you today from the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqey and Passamaquoddy people, and graciously acknowledge all of the territories that you're all coming to us today from. As Mahadio mentioned on day one, I'm new on the DWC steering committee, and it's a pleasure to serve as your MC for the third day of the conference. I want to talk a little bit about the goals of the conference. Our overall goal is to identify ways to help implement the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability and Work, which was developed in consultation with stakeholders and persons with disabilities. As 2021 continues to be a challenging year with ongoing challenges for the employment of persons with disabilities. The DWC conference is focused on how to meet those challenges and continue to make progress on the implementation of the Pan-Canadian Strategy for Disability and Work. A special thank you to CRWDP, CCRW, and ONIWIG for organizing this conference. From a personal perspective, I think it's just critical for us to have opportunities like this to bring business and civil society and persons with disabilities and all stakeholders together, unions and all stakeholders together, to discuss this very, very critically important topic, which is the employment of persons with disabilities and creating an inclusive labor force. Last Thursday was another successful day of the DWC 2021 virtual conference, focusing on the theme, Making Inclusive Workplaces a Reality. Here are some of the highlights. From the day two keynote entitled, How Can We Make Deep Change in the Workplace for the Full Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities? We heard that we need to build bridges, break down silos. Workers with disabilities must lead and guide this work. From Lily Chang, Secretary, Treasurer, Canadian Labour Congress. In the session, Supporting Inclusive Employment for People with Intellectual Disabilities and Autistic Persons in the Federal Public Service of Canada, we heard that we are really at the cusp of an important juncture in this post-pandemic world. Some of the changes will favor persons with disabilities and autism. We can make our workplaces more inclusive and accessible. In tools and strategies to support employers' efforts to include persons living with disabilities in the workforce, we heard that there is a distinction between integrating people and inclusion. Inclusion goes way beyond integration. It's about minimizing obstacles at many levels. There was incredible engagement in the session Disability, Women, Youth, and Employment, and the networking session that followed, with 140 plus people. It was discussed that there needs to be an intersectional framework for disability and employment instead of just talking about a disability framework for women, and women have different issues when we're talking disability and employment. In several sessions, we heard that disability confident employers have to have support from the top. Business leaders have to be leading the charge, that business leaders and CEOs need to be signing the documents that are saying that they will be disability confident or disability inclusive, and that there's got to be a plan and a good management strategy in place. You have to assess your environment and the situation, set your goals, make the plan, evaluate, and change. A key theme from the Funding Employment Services to Create Sustainable Employment Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities session was that where you do need to provide supports to people, it helps that they can be customizable as people have different needs, and use the 3 C's approach: be customizable, contextualize, and comprehensive. Today's sessions will focus on the theme ensuring secure and comprehensive supports for persons with disabilities. This is a recognition of the importance of providing a solid foundation of supports to ensure that all persons with disabilities can fulfill their full potential in our communities and in the workplace. We have 2 sets of parallel sessions today, a keynote and 4 networking sessions. There are also recorded vignettes about the lived experience of persons with disabilities or the experience of employers of persons with disabilities under the vignettes tab, and short pre-recorded presentations available on demand under the pre-recorded tab on the conference website. And we encourage you to have a look. For common tech questions about navigating the conference website and participating in the conference session, visit the Frequently Asked Questions page, where you will also find our participant guide. Now I want to chat about some accessibility features for the conference sessions. We are pleased to provide CART and ASL interpretation for all of the live conference sessions, and French-English interpretation for all the keynotes and many of the parallel sessions. Captioning is available by clicking on the CC button or live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can also view the live captions by clicking on the stream text URL posted in the chat box. If you wish to view the captions on a separate screen outside of the Zoom platform. All pre-recorded presentations include captions for accessibility. The video of an ASL interpreter will be on your screen, as your video layout in Zoom will already display the ASL interpreter in side-by-side mode. You can adjust the size of the screen with the ASL interpreter by placing your cursor on the bar between the 2 screens and dragging the bar side to side. For all keynotes and many of the parallel sessions, French-English interpretation is available. There will be a note in the program, des interprètes français-anglais seront disponibles. English-French interpreters will be available. In Zoom, select the French language channel by clicking on the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select French. You can then hear the meeting audio translated into French by a live interpreter. Pour tous les discours d'ouverture et de nombreuses sessions parallèles, une interprétation français-anglais est disponible. Il y aura une note dans le programme. Des interprètes français-anglais seront disponibles. French-English interpreters will be available. Dans Zoom, sélectionnez le canal de langue française en cliquant sur l'icône d'interprétation au bas de votre écran, puis sélectionnez Français. Vous pourrez alors entendre l'audio de la réunion traduit en français par un interprète en direct. If navigating the website is not accessible to you, you can send us an email to receive alternative agenda in Word with links to join the conference sessions. We have asked all speakers to share with us only accessible materials if they want us to post them on the website. If you find any material posted on our website that is not accessible, please let us know by sending an email to info@dwcstrategy.ca. Now, some guidance on how to join sessions and if you need technical support. There is a chat box for technical support available at the bottom right corner of the website for those having trouble accessing the virtual sessions. For joining conference sessions, you must add the sessions you want to watch to your agenda. Make sure you're logged in, go to the conference sessions page and click on the title of each session you're interested in viewing. Add it to your agenda if it's not already there by clicking on the Register and Add to My Agenda button. You can then join or watch by clicking the green Join Presentation button. All sessions that you have added to your agenda will appear on My Personal Agenda, and you can access them from there. Note that this conference doesn't support Internet Explorer browser. Conference sessions will be recorded and available on the conference website for 3 months after the conference. This year, our virtual conference introduces networking sessions. In the first 3 days of the conference, after the first set of sessions, from 2:05 to 2:25, specifically designed as an opportunity for delegates to share your ideas and thoughts. To participate in the networking session, and there doesn't appear to be any more notes about that in this. So we will see if someone can fill that blank in after. The final day of the conference will be tomorrow, and it will focus on moving forward together towards the full inclusion in employment. This is the day when we will all want to harness everyone's energy and commitment to make 2022 a year of major progress for employment and inclusion of persons with disabilities. And now I'd like to turn the floor back over to Maureen Haan to introduce our keynote speaker.
So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to Deputy Minister Yazmine Laroche. Yazmine Laroche is Canada's first Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility. In this role, she is responsible for overseeing the efforts of the Canadian Public Service to meet the requirements of the Accessible Canada Act. More about DM Laroche can be found in her bio on the conference website, but what you won't find there is a shout out to her continued commitment and dedication to ensuring that the work that civil society is doing here at the DWC initiative and the work that she's undertaking in the federal government is in alignment. And that's a really important, it's an important piece that I think that you're going to address today. So with no further ado, over to you. Thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Maureen. I love these opportunities, and I love the opportunity to work with you. And I just want to say personally how much I benefited from your wisdom and just your support. And I'll probably come back to that a little bit later on when I share some of our lessons learned doing our public service accessibility strategy, because it's all about allies. This is not something you can do on your own. It really does. It takes more than a village. It takes a world. So I'm really, really happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Before I start, I would just like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from my home in Ottawa, and this is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. And it's very important to recognize that wherever we are in this country, we are sitting on the territories of those who have been here long before we or our ancestors arrived. And I just want to reiterate my thanks to Maureen and the CCRW for inviting me to be part of this event, because I love these events. I'm so honored to be here with all of you participating who are working so hard in so many different sectors to remove barriers to employment. And I really enjoyed listening to Krista summarize some of the discussions you've already been having. And I was kind of relieved to hear that some of the themes that are emerging are very consistent with some of the things I want to share with you today. You know, we're really talking now about making accessibility and disability inclusion real. And today's discussion, and I love the topic, is how to ensure secure and comprehensive supports for people with disabilities. I would probably add one or two descriptors to that. I would say enduring or sustainable to that, because that's really at the heart of what we're trying to do in the federal public service with our strategy. So as Maureen mentioned, I am Canada's first Deputy Minister of Public Service Accessibility, and I'm also the federal government's first Deputy Minister with a visible disability. And my office, the Office of Public Service Accessibility, was created just after the Accessible Canada Act was tabled in Parliament in June of 2018, and my job was created in August. Our mandate was a pretty straightforward one. It was to prepare the Public Service of Canada to meet or to exceed the requirements of the legislation once it came into force. And it did come into force in July of 2019. And of course, the aim was to make Canada completely barrier-free by 2040. So essentially, the Act requires all federally regulated organizations to take a very proactive and a systematic approach to identify, to remove, and to prevent barriers to accessibility. In May of 2019, we launched Nothing Without Us, an accessibility strategy for the Public Service of Canada. And really that strategy is a roadmap, and it's a roadmap for us to become a model of accessibility that can maybe, we hope, be replicated and will inspire other organizations in Canada and around the world. So we're 2 years in. 2 years into the implementation of our strategy. And we're starting to see a solid foundation gradually being built, which is going to allow for more sustained accessibility practices right across the federal government and the public service. Back when we started, the focus was all about raising awareness and creating the conditions to make change possible. You know, when you're trying to do big culture change, the first thing you have to do is make people aware of why you're doing it and really help sensitize them to the issues. And then you have to start gradually trying to create those conditions, finding the ways that you can make that change happen. What we're seeing this year, 2 years in now, is a clear shift to implementation and to action. So this is really a culture shift, and it's bringing accessibility into the heart of the government's broader diversity and inclusion efforts. Now, given the subject of this conference, I really would like to focus a bit on employment. So you know, I'm sure you're aware, the Government of Canada committed to hiring 5,000 new Canadians or new employees with disabilities by 2025. And to that end, we launched a lot of new initiatives to try and bring in more people. A targeted summer student hiring program. We've got inventories now of fully qualified people with disabilities in specific occupational categories, which is really, really interesting. And we're creating a much larger cohort of interns in the public service with disabilities. And just recently, the Public Service Commission of Canada added their virtual door to talent with disabilities. And it's an inventory of graduates who've come through the summer employment program for students with disabilities and are now eligible for bridging into full-time employment, which is great because the goal is we're trying to make it easy for managers to find great people, great talent with disabilities. So this is a good start, but we know we still need to do a lot more if we're going to meet that target of 5,000 employees. And if we're going to meet the target of meeting what's called labor force or labor market availability, which is 9%, and we're still at about 5.2% in terms of public servants who've identified as living with a disability. So we know we need to do a little bit more to assess where are the gaps and identify some creative solutions. We're spending a lot of time now trying to encourage managers to take people who are in these pools and in these inventories. Now, I've talked about the employment side, which like the recruitment side, which is huge, absolutely huge. But at the same time, you need to make sure that the people that you're recruiting are coming into a place that is welcoming and that there's truly an inclusive work environment. And we know from the early days in this job, our public service employee survey showed that employees with disabilities do not necessarily have as positive an experience as others. So we know that we need to focus on the work environment as well if we're going to be able to recruit, but also to retain talent. And this is very important because public servants like me, we're all getting older. And so we need to make sure that we are capable of replacing ourselves with great people who are going to feel that they can make a contribution. And frankly, workplace accommodations is a key part of it. It's part of the problem, and it's definitely part of the solution. We have heard way too often that people feel their career options are limited because of a complex and sometimes what is seen to be a very demeaning approach to workplace accommodations. So one of our priorities is really to building a workplace that has a much more consistent and a timely approach to accommodations right across the public service. Of course, we need to improve the data that we're collecting about how it's working, and we also need to do a better job of sharing best practices. But for me, the real game changer is our workplace accessibility passport. It's a flagship project coming out of our centralized enabling workplace fund. And this is going to make it so much easier for employees with disabilities and their managers to nail down the supports that are required and to really streamline what is can be a very cumbersome process. It started as a pilot project. It's now including 23 federal organizations who are testing the model. They're getting user feedback, and we are now starting the development of a digital version. And I'm really excited about this. You know, I was wondering it took us a long time to find a really good partner because everybody that we wanted to partner with kept telling us that, oh, we didn't need to worry about the accessibility stuff in the digital version from the get-go. We would get to that later. And that just runs counter to everything that we're trying to do. We know you have to build in accessibility from the beginning. And now our colleagues at the Chief Information Office are partnering with us, and we are going to have a digital version. And not only will it be fully accessible, it's also going to be interoperable with all of the new HR and pay systems that are being designed. I'm so excited about this. Imagine a world where you only have to disclose once, and you have the confidence that you will have the supports that you need wherever you go in the public service. To me, that is the definition of something that is secure, comprehensive, and enduring. And we're funding other projects through that centralized enabling workplace fund, and they're all targeted to the same end result, which is, how do we remove workplace barriers? How do we create a workplace that works for everybody? We're also starting to see, and I'm really happy about this because it is all about nothing without us. We're starting to see more and more involvement of people with lived experience of disability shaping the design and the delivery of new initiatives. So over the past year, for example, again, on the employment side, people with disabilities have contributed to the launch of our new Mentorship Plus initiative that matches senior leaders with aspiring leaders to create more opportunities. And what we're calling the Mosaic Leadership Development Program. And these are targeted to supporting underrepresented groups, such as people with disabilities. We, of course, recognize the need for greater representation of employees with disabilities at the senior levels, at the executive levels, and we need better career progression. And so there's a big focus coming to see, how do we do that? What kind of programs are needed? What other supports are needed to make sure that people with disabilities see themselves in leadership positions? I don't want people to experience what I did when I started in the public service, where I did not see a single other person who looked like me in leadership roles. The other really great project that our fund is investing in, and I'm also really proud of it, is a neurodiversity recruitment program. And it's very exciting. Again, co-designed with people with lived experience, as well as recruitment experts who specialize in top talent in neurodiversity. And so the idea is to make the hiring process as accessible as possible from recruitment right through to onboarding. And I think it has great potential to show how do you build a process that's going to get top talent and make sure that everybody succeeds. So this culture change in the public service, it is happening. And as it happens, demand continues to grow for accessibility related tools and services. So we're seeing some really interesting tools that address the need to make working accessibly and inclusively easier. For example, Employment and Social Development Canada has put out its accessibility playbook, and it comes from their Center of Expertise for Accessible Client Service. What this playbook does is it raises awareness about accessibility and client service, and it helps people understand how do you actually remove barriers in programs and service delivery. There's also a new managers toolkit, and that helps to equip managers to hire people with disabilities, but also to increase HR professionals' confidence in giving advice and guidance. So we are making progress, but at the heart of it all is culture. It is culture, it is always culture. To make disability inclusion real, to truly eliminate barriers to participation, you need to get it working right through your organization. It needs to become part of the fabric of how you work. So yes, it definitely requires leadership, absolutely, to drive it. But it can't just be leadership. It has to be everybody in the organization who feels that disability confidence, who feels comfortable in tackling these issues and building a more inclusive workplace. What it cannot be is the responsibility and the accountability of a small group of individuals like my team. Yes, we can drive, we can incite, we can rattle cages, but we don't actually own any of the levers. I don't own any policy instruments. So I have to work through and with others. And that's a good thing because it helps others start to take ownership as well. It really does have to become the everyday reality and responsibility, not just of our leaders, but of our teams and individual employees. We really need to encourage employees to be that change. So I want to talk about some of the things that are happening that I think are helping to create the conditions for success. So a lot of different, we call them functional communities. So they're people who work in different professions in the federal public service. And they've really started great work to assess their own accessibility confidence and where they might be lacking in expertise. So for example, 3 targeted inventories have been launched to recruit people with disabilities into policy and data analysis, in digital and computer sciences, and into financial analysis, because these communities looked at themselves and said, we're not representative enough. We need to go find talent. And on the communications side, our communications colleagues have just completed work on a draft mandatory procedure for accessible communications for all public service organizations to help us up our game in terms of how we communicate with each other and with Canadians. So I've been doing a lot lately, encouraging our various occupational groups and functional communities to really think about their work and to ask if that's the most accessible and inclusive way for them to be working. So we're asking questions like, do you have the skills you need to take this on? And if not, where are you going to get them? And how are you going to recruit these skills into your community? And then we're asking, are you tapping into the amazing talent of people with disabilities? And encouraging them to do some targeted hiring, because that is really going to start to help bridge that gap. And you guys have talked about that as well already in the conference, but we are also focusing in our discussions with other equity seeking groups to think about intersectionality and recognize that disability doesn't discriminate and it cuts across every possible level of identity. And of course, we're introducing a lot more training. Because that is part of the culture change. You have to equip people, you have to give them tools so that they can understand how their environment is changing and what they need to do. Some departments, for example, are introducing mandatory training on how to create accessible documents for all of their employees. Another great example comes from FinTrack. That is the acronym for for the federal agency that's responsible for combating money laundering, terrorist activity financing, and other threats to our national security. And they are one of our key partners on the neurodiversity recruitment pilot project. They put together 2 learning sessions targeted to their own employees. They had 75% participation rates for those. And the idea was to help their employees have a better understanding about autism and neurodiversity, and also to recognize the opportunities and the benefits of recruiting from this group. Well, I'm really happy to say that in addition to great participation, FinTrack is the first organization partnering with us on this project to have just hired 5 new employees through that pilot project. So these are concrete steps. They're not, they may seem small, but they're really, really important because, again, it's part of that culture change. And I have lots more examples, but I'm not going to go through lists. What I would invite you to do is to read our 2nd annual progress report on our strategy. And it can be found at canada.ca/accessiblegc. And it was just unveiled on Friday to mark International Day of People with Disabilities. Now, in the coming year, we've got a huge opportunity in the federally regulated sectors because our colleagues at ESDC, Krista's organization, are introducing regulations. And every federally regulated organization is going to have to submit a publicly available accessibility plan about how they're going to identify, remove, and prevent barriers to the full participation and inclusion of people with disabilities. And they'll also have to say, how did they consult with Canadians with disabilities, including their own employees, in the development of those plans, and how those ideas and concerns were addressed. So our employees will have a huge opportunity to help develop these plans. And I am encouraging all public servants with disabilities to get involved because it is a great opportunity to help shape the future of work and the public service. Something else that I've done, I'm supported in my work by a deputy minister accessibility group. And we've been together now for 2.5 years, and we're just setting out our priorities for the year ahead. So we looked at what we've accomplished, and we looked at where we think we still really need to put a lot of focus. The first was we need to embed accessibility into the return to the workplace. Many of us are still working from home. We're talking about eventually some kind of a hybrid work model. We need to start now. You can't start talking about going back to the workplace unless you've built in accessibility. The second is continued work on removing employment barriers with a huge push on workplace accommodations. The third priority area is delivering barrier-free services to internal and to external clients. Again, that gets back to how do we equip our people so they can do that. The fourth is all about culture. It's building and sustaining a culture of accessibility and inclusion. And that really it's not just like lofty ideas, it's what concretely do you need to do, whether it's changing policies or whether it's actually helping people to identify core competencies and capacities in accessibility and disability inclusion. And the fifth, which underpins all of the other ones, is data. It was data and analysis that allowed us to develop our strategy, and it's data, measurement, and tracking that will let us know how are we doing, what kind of progress are we making, and what might we need to change. Now, I'm going to conclude because I have been at this now for almost 3 years, and we've been doing a lot of thinking about what we've learned. And I thought I'd share that with you because, again, if we're really going to be ensuring that these supports that we're trying to develop for employees and people with disabilities are sustainable and enduring, I think there's some things that we can all think about as we're developing our strategies and our plans. The first, nothing without us. You cannot create a strategy and a plan to make things better if you're not including the people you want to help. And, it is just, it's at the heart of what we do. And I think it should be at the heart of what anybody does in this space. The second, and I've mentioned it, it's evidence-based. Yes, you want vision and aspirations, but you need to know, you need to be able to say, this is the change we're trying to make. We're either trying to, improve employment rates by this much. We're trying to reduce the length of time it takes to get your accommodations by that much. We're trying to improve employee engagement scores by this much. Really important, because that lets you know if what you're doing is contributing to that change, and it helps you decide whether you need to maybe change what you're doing. The third, and this was a hard one for me to learn, I have to tell you, I am a very impatient person. I want to see change happening like yesterday, but it is really important, and I call it, don't boil the ocean. You cannot do everything. So you need to figure out both what can be done quickly, but also what is going to make the biggest difference. Yes, change takes time, but you have to be able to make and to show progress. Otherwise, people start to get cynical, they start to get disenchanted, and you might lose trust, and that's a killer. The fourth is learn from others. What are we doing here at this conference? We're sharing and we're learning from what we're all doing. We looked to the private sector, the public sector, the not-for-profit sector, and academia, and not just in Canada, but around the world. And we shamelessly took what others were doing to try and adapt it to our own circumstances. You can always learn from the experiences of others. The fifth is you got to keep going back and checking. A strategy cannot be cast in stone. You have to continuously review, reevaluate, and revise it. COVID taught us a lot about what was missing from our strategy, and now we've adapted and we've tweaked it. And this is going to enable us to fine-tune and be as relevant as possible. And the sixth, and maybe this is the most important one of all, is allies. And that's what I started with. We have to not just be, we need to both be and have allies. Why is this important? Nothing without us is critical. We must include people with disabilities in this work, but we can't make it only the job of people with disabilities. And that often happens in these big social change initiatives. We want the people who've been harmed or wronged to be the ones to fix it. We need input and allyship, and it's so important that people with power and privilege can help to open the doors and create room at the decision-making table. So it's a joint effort. The other thing I'd say is it's also important to note and to celebrate your successes along the way. I do these shout outs at deputy minister meetings to colleagues who are doing interesting work. And, gives them a little bit of profile, and it creates a little bit of healthy competition among deputy ministers to see, oh, well, they're getting profile. Maybe I need to be doing more so that I can get some of that attention too. I guess my final thought is that if we're really going to eliminate barriers, if we're really going to create supports, you need to create a culture of accessibility, where accessibility is just a reflex, in which you're automatically asking, is everything as accessible as it can be? That's what I'm hoping we're going to accomplish in the public service. And if we can do it, I think anybody can. It is definitely doable. So Maureen, I'm going to wrap at that and just thank you again for the opportunity and congratulate you on what seems to be a fabulous conference.
Yazmine, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing all of the important work that the federal government has been undertaking under your leadership. I think that your indication about measurement is huge, and it's a point at this conference and in all of the work of the Disability and Work in Canada initiative is to make sure that there is that we are we're measuring what it is that we're doing. Steve Mantis said that on his panel, right? If you don't end up measuring what's important, then you end up looking at what you're measuring, and that might not be important. So we only have 4 minutes. But so we won't get to all the questions. Some of them are a little bit more technical questions that you can, I know, always reach out to Yazmine's office. Happy to answer more technical questions, but maybe just this one question. It's quite big, but in 30, maybe 60 seconds or less. We're talking about moving policy into action, something like a target of 5,000 new hires with people with disabilities is a really great start, because the result then is very, very real, of course, right? But disability is a very broad term. Within the labor market pool of people with disabilities, we know that certain groups are significantly more excluded from employment than others. And if we don't target more specifically within that very broad category, how can we make sure that the most excluded groups are not left behind in this strategy, which could end up being celebrated for a great result, then in effect contributes to leaving certain Canadians out?
That is such a great question. And I'm really, really glad that you asked it. You are so right. I mean, disability is this huge and diverse community. And until very recently, we didn't have disaggregated data. That was a problem. In fact, we had some legislative hurdles because under the EE Act, we were a bit constrained in terms of the definition of disability. The ACA has of course introduced a much broader definition, and we're working with Statistics Canada and our colleagues in the Chief Human Resources Office to standardize our definitions. And we, for the first time this past year, we were able to disaggregate our data around our public service employee survey. So we actually now have a better sense of, when in the harassment and discrimination scores, how do you disaggregate? So we're starting to tease through those data, but I totally agree with you. It's harder to pinpoint. It's the same thing with what I'll call the visible minority community. If you can't disaggregate, how do you actually know if there are certain racialized groups that are having more challenges than others? It's very comparable, and we are starting. I won't pretend that we're there yet, but I think initiatives, for example, like our neurodiversity recruitment project, that wouldn't have been possible a few years ago. We are starting to be able to take much more measured and targeted steps, but it is a journey and we're not going to get there tomorrow, but we are very aware of it and we are committed to doing that.
So I'm going to ask you one of the quick questions, Yazmine, because we're short on time, but somebody's asked, how do I sign up to be one of those 5,000 people with disabilities that the government wants to hire? I think that's actually a few questions have been asked about that. So if you could just give us a quick, how are we going to do that? Where's the connection made?
Well, I would encourage everybody to go to, and I'm going to get the acronym, but the Public Service Commission of Canada is the one that's doing a lot of the efforts in terms of intake and recruitment. And if you go to GC Jobs, you should be able to find some information there on recruitment of people with disabilities. There are a number of different inventories. So if you have a data science background, a computer science background, a financial background, we're hiring.
Excellent.
So there are pools. So I would really encourage you to go to the Public Service Commission website and look that up. That's how you do it.
Okay.
Please do it.
Yes, please do it. So thank you so much again, Yazmine. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your wisdom and your leadership, and for working with all of us here at the DWC initiative. And yeah, thank you.